Hi, Whiskey Ringers. I hope you're all well and enjoying the podcast. As always, I welcome any thoughts, suggestions, and feedback you have to make the podcast better, and of course, any suggestions you have for guests you'd like to see. I wanted to share with you a new way to participate in the Whiskey Ring Podcast Bottle Share Club. There are several people who have reached out to me about being put on a waiting list for the top tier. After much thought, I've decided to open that tier up to more people. If you have been hesitating, or if you are a current supporter wanting to level up, reach out to me at david@whiskeyinmyweddingring.com or through social media or Patreon, and I'll be happy to help you move up. I also wanted to send a special thanks to my current $25 a month patrons, who have agreed not only to this change, but who have been truly irreplaceable supporters of this and who make this podcast happen. Thank you to all of you in no particular order. I'm talking to you, Ken, Jesse, Jim, Bill, Don, and John, Yana, Connor, Zach, Scott, Ollie, Steve, and Jake. Without your support, this podcast wouldn't be happening anymore. And thank you for helping me to keep the lights on and keep guests coming to you every week. As always, you could support the podcast for as little as $1 a month, with ad-free episodes starting at $5 a month. This support is the reason the lights stay on, and to make sure the podcast and website are the best they can be. Thank you to all who are already patrons, and I hope to have more listeners join soon. Visit patreon.com/whiskeyinmyweddingring to join today. Without further ado, here's a new episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. Hey folks, welcome to a new episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. Today I am thrilled, truly thrilled to have on someone I've been wanting to talk to for a long time. I've read her book. You probably have too, or if not, I hope you will after this interview. You have probably tasted some of her whiskey from Milam and Greene, as well as other spots along the way. Please welcome Heather Greene.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I am. So we've got many questions to go through today, and just to do a quick callback. So right now, Heather is the CEO at Milam and Greene down in Blanco, Texas. We spoke to Blair Alt about a year and a half, 2 years ago, about Milam and Greene and what had gone on there up until that point in terms of the whiskeys. Now we've gotten to try a couple of extra releases since then, two of which I have with me. The very small batch, which is a straight bourbon whiskey finished with French oak staves, as well as the recently released Bottled and Bond straight bourbon whiskey. But you can definitely go back to that episode with Blair just to hear anything more about specifically about Milam and Greene that we might not hit on today. So with that said, let's jump right in. So the first question I have for you is almost unrelated entirely, other than it came from your book, which is, have you gotten a Michter's King Tut decanter yet?
Oh my gosh, that is a great question. I do not have a Michter's King Tut decanter, but that would give me great pleasure to finally have one of those. I forgot
So,
about that. Yeah,
so I will admit I have the full set, um,
that's amazing.
with the minis and all that. You don't need the whiskey inside. The folks at Michter's will tell you it was not good stuff. Then I've gotten to try it. You're not missing anything, but
It's
it is
great
fun.
stuff now, and I am a huge
Yeah.
fan and always have been a huge fan of Michter's. I
Oh
just
yeah.
can't say enough about that. I'm a type of, there's a lot of people who are really, you have to have a healthy dose of competitiveness, but in this industry, but
Yeah.
I also am fine saying how great they are, or great other brands are if they truly are, and they are a fantastic brand. So maybe the King Tut liquid wasn't great, but I will guarantee you their products are great now.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And when I read that in your book, it stood out to me because I had the full set. I'm a
That's
huge
cool.
ancient Egypt nerd, so it, I'm a nerd about a lot of things. Anyway, that uh, palette opener aside, I, I wanted to dedicate this episode, as we were talking about just before starting recording, a little bit more to your journey and history, uh, getting to this point of being the CEO of
Mhm.
a national bourbon brand, whiskey brand, I should say, not a bourbon brand necessarily. So I wanted to hit on a couple of these points up until where you are now. So the first one, again, tangential to whiskey, but we'll start there, is I wanted to ask about music.
Sure.
Now, you've mentioned it briefly in interviews, and certainly it played a part in your book, but never really gone too much into it. So you had a
Mhm.
period of your life where you were a professional musician,
Yes, I did.
keyboardist, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
And so I'm a pianist also. So,
Yes.
um, and so the first one is just, does music still play a large part in your life?
Oh, I think so. I mean, it always will be. I don't play anymore or perform anymore. I feel like it was that was a great time in my life, and it has helped me become who I am. That I learned a tremendous amount of actually business skills, performance skills, stage skills, confidence, practice, dedication, grit, heartbreak, uh, all sorts of stuff that you face as a professional musician. And it was really something that equipped me well for running a whiskey company, because a lot of the same, these are music, in this world, like as a musician and as I was like solo and part of other projects and part of other, I had like 6 or 7 different projects. Ultimately, you're also a business person as well. And so I could take those skills and apply them to running a whiskey company. And I was prepared. I was prepared for whatever press came my way, whatever people wanted to say, all of that stuff is really, really relatable to each other. And the other thing that I think is really interesting is that I think I don't know the details of how, obviously I'm not a expert on how the brain works, but they, for me, occupy a same area of the brain. So with music, you've got to have a dedication to practice, to alone time, to writing, to, all of that stuff, practicing scales, excuse me, chords, how chords are put together. I mean, there's a real kind of pattern to that. But at the end of the day, you have to let all of that part of your brain go and then just let it get creative. So you have to let go of that to get creative. And whiskey's the same way. There's the technicality of how molecules come together to create flavor, how your casks are gonna age, where they are in the warehouse. There's skill, there's practice, there's repetition, there's mistakes, all of that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, when you're putting a brand together or a bottle together, there's something that you have to shut off in your brain to just get into the sensory place, the feel good place, the just quick yes or no place. Does this sound good? Yes or no? It doesn't sound good. Change that chord. Or does it taste good? No. Add another barrel or forget that product. I mean, so at the end of the day, it just becomes creative, something very creative.
So it's fair to say it still has very much influenced the way that you think, even though you might not play anymore. It's influenced by you think, and undoubtedly then how you put together the whiskey. Like you said, looking for those chords, where do the notes fit
Yeah,
together?
notes, no pun intended, or pun
Yeah.
intended. Yeah, you're looking for how the notes come together and to create something bigger than each individual part. I think that is. And then from running a business, so that's just from the creation part. And then of course running a business part, you have to have very thick skin to be a musician right now, any musician. And there's a ton of uncertainty in any endeavor like that. And I was equipped for it, to run the whiskey company. In fact, I might even say from a business standpoint, the music helped more than just solely being a great whiskey expert in terms of like palate and judging and all that kind of stuff. In a lot of ways, the music helped more from a business aspect. That's where I was really surprised to find myself reaching into that part of myself to do what I needed to do.
In your journey to becoming what you are now, whiskey CEO, you rose pretty quickly, I would say. And from, let's say, from music, then you got into the your time at the Flatiron Room, and then
Mhm.
writing, consulting, all of this until 2020, when I think 2020, correct? Or 2019?
2018. So I was
You
in whiskey at that point for about 10 years.
Right.
So, I mean, it's relative, depend, yeah, I guess so. I mean, I've seen some CEOs become CEOs earlier. You look at tech and it's like overnight there's like a CEO. So I don't know, I
Yeah,
guess it's
that's true.
relative, right?
I guess.
But yeah, I know what you mean. I think it's important for people to know that actually, like, while it may look like that, because I got a lot of media attention for it, that there's actually a long time behind it. So, there was a lot of a work for many years before I actually dipped into being a CEO. I shouldn't wait, dipped in. I don't even know why I just said that. Drinking from a hot fire hose, being a CEO, like completely like, oh my God, what did I get myself into kind of thing.
Right. And I mean, I'm curious what that initial conversation was like to say to, well, let's say, what was the conversation like when you met with Marsha Milam
Hmm.
and whoever else was in the meeting, and to say, we
Yeah.
want to start, get really get this brand up and running. We want you to come on as CEO. Uh, yeah, what was that like?
Well, it was flattering, first of all. It was very much like, wow. I had spent the summer consulting with the group down here, this really cool group of people, including Marsha Milam, who had a vision and a dream and lots of fun ideas and in Austin, which is of course a great music city. So I was familiar with Austin anyways. I'd played at South by Southwest numerous times. I had musician friends here. This was not a place that I wasn't unfamiliar with. So I came down to consult for a summer. And at the end of the summer, this wonderful team was like, hey, if you come down, let's go big and let's build it together. And, I was flattered and I really liked the people. I'd been asked before to start other brands or work with other brands. There was something about this that really touched my soul. I think part of it was, Marsha was a music producer for a long time, so we got along really well on music. Some of the other team behind the scenes, some of the other investors I work with were also really involved in the music community here. All of them seem to play instruments. So this was like, wow, there's something here that works from a spiritual level. And while I don't do music anymore, and the reason for that is because, like, whenever I have time off, I'm taking a walk with my dog or cooking with my husband or working in a garden or exercising. It's like hard for me to just sit down and play piano anymore. It's just, I'm doing other things at the moment. But, there was something about them that really appealed to me. And I think on a spiritual level, we all just feel that way. And even our director of operations out at the distilling uh, site and Blanco, Rick Monroe, is a guitar player. And so, like, you can just look and see all the people that play instruments in our company. It's pretty cool. I don't know if I answered your question. I feel like I just went on a tangent, but
No, no, no. It was totally fine.
you can bring me
Um,
back around when I ADD it all over the place.
no, no, all good. Yeah, I want to pull back to Texas for a second too. As you
Mhm.
said, you had friends in Austin. You had played at South by Southwest. You had it wasn't like your first time going down to Texas.
No,
Uh,
not at all. I loved it
I was
here.
so, yeah, I was curious because in your book, when you were describing the different categories of whiskey, one of them being corn whiskey,
Mhm.
you specifically called out in that case Balcones as it was a distillery playing with flavors and innovating in what corn whiskey could be. But for the
Yeah.
Brimstone, you called out notes of this fired Texas scrub oak, locally grown blue Hopi corn, and
Mhm.
you used the words pure Texan terroir. And uh, for those who don't, you didn't grow up in Texas, you're
No.
northeasterner like me,
Correct.
and it seemed like even in that one sentence or two, there was this connection to Texas that you had, and this is also more a qualitative thing, but I feel like when you have a picture of you with a cowboy hat on, you don't seem uncomfortable. Like that seems like a very
Isn't
natural
that
thing.
funny? A lot of people say that. I wore hats a lot and I had cowboy boots for years in New York City. So yeah, it's almost like, yeah, this fits. This works.
Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
that's
I
really the
do
question.
love a
Like,
good
was
cowboy
there
hat. I have a lot of cowboy hats now. I'm
yeah,
super
like
into it.
so was there always that pull towards Texas, or was it something that you more just recognized in the moment of, hey, this could really be something here?
The latter. I never thought in a million years I'd go from New York City to Texas. If you had asked me this years ago, I would have been surprised. But when life offers you such interesting opportunities, you go for it, or I do. I mean, I, speaking of music, when I had worked for William Grant and Sons for 5 years, and I had left there in whiskey. So I was doing whiskey and music at the same time. It was not like a hard stop. And I left there thinking I would go back into music. And I started working at the Flatiron Room, which has a beautiful stage. And I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to start working in this whiskey venue and do some music and maybe perform and just like help book shows. And I just wanted to combine them. And then, I got a book deal. And, I just was like, well, the book you're referring to. And I was like, well, I got to do the book deal. It's just like kind of whatever came in front of me. I was like, yeah, that looks good. Let's do it. So that's kind of how this felt too. And I was really excited about it. And it felt right because I felt that it was a place that I could, with this team, really express whiskey in a new way and do things that I believed would help grow the category, that would have a great, it would be a great adventure to explore terroir further, climate, all the things that I was interested in. And then there was a team here that was like awesome, like Marlene Holmes, who was with Beam for 27 years. Rick Monroe had created this super cool mash recipe. It just felt right. And sometimes you just have to trust that intuition. Again, maybe coming from being a creative music person, at the end of the day, you have to trust something that's beyond your rational brain.
And
Because
to go back to,
your rational brain says, no way, what are you doing?
right, right.
Right.
You said working for William Grant and Sons. You had the chance to work for a while with Ian Miller,
Oh my God,
and
I love him.
I mean, in describing your kind of relationship with him and the mentor mentee kind of thing that it came off as, you called whiskey it was a way of life over there in Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
It was craft passed down from generations and spread deeply into communities. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
in your time in whiskey, so
Mm-hmm.
10, 15 years, 15, almost 16 years now, then this is paralleled also the growth, excuse me, of the craft movement in America, where we have all these new distilleries coming online, all these new families and new
Mm-hmm.
people suddenly in whiskey. And I was curious, from all these different perspectives you've had, do you think that whiskey can become a way of life here outside of, let's say, Kentucky and Tennessee? Can it become a way of life here in a craft that is passed down from generations and spread through the area, or is that something uniquely Scottish?
I think over time, like when we look at where we are based in Blanco, I think they call it Blanco. Some people call it Blanco. The locals, by the way, whoever's hearing this, the locals all over say Blanco. I say Blanco or Blanco depending where I am. But um, I would say yes. But I mean, Scotland has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years on us. But if you look at the small community that we've built out there, it's becoming a way of life for those people out there. And those people are starting to have children, and people in our company are starting to have children. And, you know, it's not whiskey as a way of life, it's more the industry and the skill set and the community and the life and the employment that it builds, and camaraderie. And I think that is where I'm starting to see movement in our company. And I was just having the conversation with the daughter of one of my dearest partners who passed away last year. And, we talked about that. And she's the next generation, and she's grew up now in Milam and Greene. And so, I mean, she's 23 now. Her name's Emily. And it's like, we talked about that. Like, how do we make sure that the legacy continues and keep people employed and keep it going? And, I do think that you're starting to see that generational already movement, and that's really exciting. Now with that, I feel very responsible too, because I do want it to grow, and it's beyond just like creating a brand. It's creating a community and people. And my hope is that when consumers go and look and they choose brands, if they know about the people behind us, what we're building out here where there was nothing, where what it means to have a company like this, like I think they would reach for Milam and Greene. Plus, it tastes great, right? So it has a soul. There's a real soul in this product, and how do you create that vibe and get it out? And that's part of that. Feels to me that generational thing you're talking to, can it sustain itself? And yes, I mean, in Scotland, you felt that soul too, way up in the Highlands.
Absolutely. And as I said, we have to kind of exclude in a way a lot of Kentucky and Tennessee, because when you're Freddie No and you're the eighth generation, you already got that way of life that's continuing. But with
We're
all of
building it.
these, yeah, we're building it. We've got a little while before eight generations. So,
Yes.
take your time. In terms of
Well,
the,
Marlene branched off from the Freddie No family, so we actually have knowledge coming from them, getting behind the DNA of what we do, which is pretty cool.
yeah,
It
27
makes
years of
Milam and
Beam. I
Greene.
mean, you're going to bring something with you.
Yeah.
So, in terms of the soul of the whiskey, as you were describing it too, there's something else that you and I talked about in person that is worth bringing up. So, Milam and Greene is women owned, women led. It's not exclusively women on the team, but
Mm-mm.
for all intents and purposes, women owned, women led. But unlike some producers who also share that status, it's not marketing wise a core selling point.
Filler.
Yeah.
No, I never
Um,
want that to be a selling point, because I don't believe that matters. I need to create a great whiskey. And I think if anything, when you run out and start really talking, you alienate some people for whom it's like, are you making a good whiskey or not? And our decision was to focus on and double down on creating a great whiskey and talking about our expertise and our innovation and what we do, and our backgrounds in the industry, not who we are, because the world is going to do that for us anyways. It's the first thing other people say about us. They don't talk about our whiskey or our taste or how excellent it is or what we've built, how we are actually competing and winning awards, how we have to hit the ball harder. Like none of that, that's always second or third when anybody talks about us. It's always women run. And so we don't have to do that. That would just be a waste of marketing money, because the world markets it that way for us. And so we double down on everything else. And I think that's worked because it's skin deep, it's just not, so to speak. So when you promote a brand, I think based on identity, you just ask people, you're begging this for the situation where people then say, well, yeah, but is it any good? And that's really in our price point and the type of whiskey we create. That's really what people want to know. People love the idea of it. We get covered for it. And honestly, people talk about it all the time, but when you go to the store and you're a whiskey buyer and you're going to spend $80 on a bottle of whiskey or 60, it's not the first thing you want to know, but it's a nice to have when it's there, if you so care about that.
and it helps too. I mean, I want to talk about awards a bit too, because it's a really intriguing subject from
Oh my God, I could go on for a long time on awards.
so
I don't know what's
the
going
way that
on.
yeah, the way that I'll set it up for you is that you were honored as the Master Blender of the Year at last year's Wow Women of Whiskey Awards at
I
the
love them.
symposium.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a wonderful thing because it's not labeled female master blender of the year, and it doesn't come off, the award doesn't come off as, because the women of whiskey are awarding it, it can only go to a woman, or it's only for that reason. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I love that. They just called it Master Blender of the Year, and you have to dig in to be like, oh, it was awarded by, a woman's primarily, women's oriented organization. Again, same thing. It's like, no, I'm Master Blender. They awarded me Master Blender of the Year,
Right.
and it's like when you put the word female or woman in front of these things, what you're saying is you're only top of half the population, not the whole population, just half.
Right.
That's how I
Which,
read it sometimes. I'm like, top female. No, like, no, I'd like to just be top master blender. How about
yeah,
that?
with every qualifier, it takes something away from the person who has earned it. I
I think
I,
so.
I agree with that. And so the tension there that I want to explore a bit is that
Mhm.
uh, you've said on a couple of different interviews and such that, as you alluded to, there are issues with award shows and judging and
Yeah.
all these things, and they can range from problems with entry fees to other roadblocks to just how the panels are set up and how people are
Right.
pouring and what orders they're in.
Mhm.
At the same time, I'm sure as a CEO who wants their product to be sold and wants it to be known really well and get accolades, you Milo and Greene is still entered and winning many awards. It's winning, at ACSA, at the Ascots. So I'd love to hear you talk about how you balance, which programs you're going to enter
Mhm.
and how you, how you choose those in order to reach those goals of having the prestigious awards, but not being fluffery for the sake of fluffery, if you will.
Oh, this is a really hot topic within my company. So, I surround myself. Look, I'm not an expert in all things. One of the things I'm not a super duper expert in is like the field of like marketing and trade marketing. And I have an amazing marketing director who she and I go back and forth all the time. Because if it was up to me, I'd be like, why are we doing any of these, at all? Because I sat on these. I'm like, I don't even understand how they work anymore. I don't understand who's on these panels. I don't think that they're designed very particularly well. Not all of them, but many. I have a lot of issues with them, and I for a long time now. But I'm going to give her side of it, which is, but people like to see, what do you win awards? And it's a great thing to put on your bottle, and it's really nice to have quotes and accolades, and I get that. So, it's really becomes more a marketing piece for companies, not, and I shouldn't say this, but it's like you don't, is it really taste or is it when they tasted it and how? And like I'm happy that, we win all these awards, but I also am curious on how some of this works behind the scenes, knowing scientifically how palate works. And there's more awards now than there are whiskey experts judging. And so to me, it feels as well, I don't, um, that they become, some of them feel more like People's Choice Awards. Like I'm fine with awards, but it's hard when for me sometimes when it's like expert, expert, expert. What is an expert and how did these people qualify to get in and have they been at it a long time? And I just don't know any of these questions. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but those things you just don't know. And so you start seeing some kind of wonky results on some of these things, and I just have to take it with a grain of salt.
And the question also comes out of I heard you, I've experienced a seminar of yours, but also heard you talk about other ones where you've done the kind of the classic experiment of the pappies, do them blind in different order and see, who actually likes them. And the 23 gets no votes as the top one
Yeah,
because
that's happened.
it's just, yeah, because it's, and this is my own opinion, but it's an oak bomb. It's way overaged. Um, I get the appeal of wanting to have one on your shelf because people know it, but it's not something that I would drink. If I'm going that
Mhm.
line, I'm probably going for the 10-year, honestly, because it's just too oaky. And in that same seminar setting, you were talking about how putting these whiskeys in different orders really makes a difference in how we're going to appreciate them And in the case of a judging panel, how we're going to judge them and rank them.
Correct. That to me is probably one of the biggest issues in judging is the order in which they appear. I mean, I've done it just when I was working at the Flatiron Room and done tons, probably thousands of tastings at this point. You can switch the order the next day and you're going to get a completely different result. I mean, it's just very, very, your whiskey is going to be judged whether they say they can or can't. It doesn't matter. It's science, it's palate, it's brain. It's going to be assessed based on what was before it. And that is not anything anybody can do anything about, because that is because you adapt to whatever flavors you tasted beforehand. So let's say you had, and look, we did this at the Monell Chemical Senses Institute back in Philadelphia when I was writing my book. And these are the top scientists in the world that do studies on brain, taste, smell, all that stuff. You can look it up. It's just fascinating. And they did it to me, a test. And this is how it worked. They had a old, those like a ketchup squeeze bottle, let's say, empty. One of those kinds in old school diners. And they filled that with aromatics of vanilla and cinnamon. And they asked me to squeeze it and smell. What do you smell? I smell vanilla and cinnamon. They gave me a second one. In that second one, it was vanilla, cinnamon, and cocoa. And they said, what do you smell? And I said, oh, this one, I smell cocoa. Now, vanilla and cinnamon were in there too. But now I smell cocoa more. That stood out to me because I had just been what they call adapted to the vanilla and the cinnamon. So this is what can happen when you are tasting whiskeys side by side, which is that you basically are negating whatever other flavors might be in there if that whiskey right before it had the exact same aromatics. Now, the same thing can be said about a lot of different things. Like when you talk about wine might be a little bit higher proof. Well, guess what? You're going to taste, you've now adapted to high proof. The next one in line, lower proof, you're going to perceive that as weaker whiskey or softer or mellower. When in fact, if that was against one that even had a lower proof, you might say that one was stronger. So how do you assess would be, for me, I'd do different things like value. What's the best value? Like I'd put all whiskeys between $40 and $45 together and say, what's the best in this price range? And then do a couple, I mean, it's really, really do it fairly. You do the 5 in one day and then switch the order the next day. And whatever wins on that, that's probably a good barometer. Something like that would work. I've seen whiskey tastings where you have a 5-year-old product that is selling on the market for 200 and against one that's selling for 50. And of course the 200 wins a gold and the 50 wins like a bronze or silver or whatever. And you're like, well, of course it should. I mean, and I've seen it with my own products. They're like, oh, this whiskey did better than this one. And you're like, well, of course good. I'm glad it did. Right. Because one is selling for $100 and one's down at like 60, 65. Like it should be better, right? It should be a different type of whiskey, but that doesn't mean that the other one isn't also a double platinum for where it lies, right? So you just start unraveling it and they stop making sense to me, quite frankly. So yeah, I'm pretty vocal about it.
No, that's good. We need to be. So it's, as someone who is tasting things all the time, like you and I we're in the minority on that in terms of how many things we taste. You're outpacing me, I'm sure, because you're tasting multiple things for your own product, let alone anything else. And I'm just tasting whatever kind of comes in the door. And so we're the exception. I understand that. So there may be some adaptations that we've gotten that allow us to kind of jump between things a little bit, but in tastings, we're usually taught a couple of rules, some of which you alluded to. Number one, go up in proof. 2, finishes after the base products, peat at the end, things like that. So for someone who's just looking to taste a bunch of products, but they are going in knowing that they can be adapted to certain things, would you do you question any of those hard and fast rules for how a tasting should be aligned within, let's say, a five pour tasting.
Oh, how I would set them out, you mean? Like in terms of how I'd
Or,
line them up?
I think I messed up my. I think I confused two things there, so or conflated them. So I think what I'm thinking of is, let's say I have five products that come in the door that day, and people want me to taste them, give a review on them,
Huh?
and do
Okay.
that. I'm looking at these five bottles. They're not necessarily the same. Maybe there's two from the same company, three from three different ones. Bourbon, a rye, a single malt. They're different things. When you have that in front of you, and you
Mm-hmm.
want to give your most
Oh,
honest,
I see. Okay.
but also potentially the most accurate tasting
Uh-huh.
notes, how would you approach that situation?
If I had five and I was like writing about, well, I did this, I would not taste them back to back for sure. If I wanted to give each one a fair share, I'd taste the single malt scotch and just like, how does this, I would look at the price, like, okay, well, they're selling it for this. So I want to know, maybe I'd pull out something at that price point or just think about what I know it around that. Maybe I wouldn't taste it, depends on what it is. So I would taste that and say, yeah, I'd buy that for a nickel. Like I think about how I would drink it. Like let's say, it was a cocktail. You could say, you think about occasion. That's how I like to do it. Again, I'm totally again, like I feel like I'm in the minority here on this. Like, how would I drink this? Like, well, a $30 beer, or I don't know what prices are. I'm gonna get myself in a pickle here with bourbon audiences, but let's say I have a value whiskey or something like that. Like I'm not gonna approach that the same way I would for something priced at $300. So I'm gonna look at it and be like, put it in a Glencairn and approach it like that. It's like, no, I'm gonna take that for a drive the way I drive it. Put it in a rocks glass, throw it on with some rocks, and like, hey, yeah, you know what? This is awesome for a cocktail. Great for on the rocks, and I sip it and eat. It's okay, but for $25, yeah, do it. Like great product. So you're looking at occasion. I look at occasion and price as well. So if I were had five completely different bottles, I'd look at the price. So I can help better kind of fit it into whether it works for that price, how I would drink it. After I taste it, of course, I'd probably do it three different ways and then make my evaluation. And I try not to do it back to back. Give them each space. Imagine if you had a wall of a lot of abstract art and you just put each one in a row, like 1 inch framed from each other, and like, which one do you like the best? You're like, wow, that looks like a mess. That's a lot of weird paintings in a row. Like your brain just has a hard time when you just think about it. It just sounds natural when I say it like that, right? Or if I had six pieces of music going at the same time and asked you, which one do you think stands out? You're like, well, that, you need to absorb artistic and creative things. This part of your brain, I think, needs space. So you have 20 whiskeys in a row. Which one do you like the best? You're like, well, now they're all by the 15th, or well, let's just say even eight, by the seventh, they're all kind of blending in your head together. And I get that even from my own product. Like they need space around them, especially with high proof. Wine I feel like might be a little different. And there's one other thing I want to talk about is you really should spit and spit, and a lot of people do. Well, with high proof, man, you're burning your mouth out by having it
Mhm.
go in and out like that. And that is responsible. But what's better to taste your whiskey is to just sip it, give it space, an hour later, do it again with another one, but no one wants to do that. It's like, nope, you go into those places and it's like, here's 80 whiskeys you got to taste in 3 days. What do you think? So,
Right.
it's a little weird to me.
Yeah, nothing's gonna taste good. And for even for people who aren't acclimated, like the judges were talking about, yourself included, you look at a 20 whiskey lineup, you're like, all right, I'm figure out a way to push through this. Maybe knowing that by a certain point,
Mouth
like seven or
will
eight,
burn. Hey, but
yeah,
it's necessary. People love it. People really,
they do.
and then
Yeah,
until people don't want to see these accolades anymore, don't want us to do it. I mean, we get requests to do it, so we do it.
sure.
But I always try to tell people, take it all with a grain of salt.
Right. Right. going back almost to the
I
Flatiron
will say
room,
that I do think Fred Minnick does a great job with his Ascot Awards.
I do have a lot of respect for Fred and his awards. Although this one's now over, I also love Paul Pacholt's awards. Um, his kind of routine of
I haven't
doing
done
like six,
Paul's.
his I think 23 was the last year. I spoke to him at the beginning of the year, and that's they may end up giving it to someone else or selling it to someone else, but he himself is retiring from it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, um, but I think I look back to when I was first starting to taste, and as you said, I went to the Flatiron Room bunch, so that was one place with a great selection to choose. Fortunate in New York, there's a lot of places that have great selections. And after three at the beginning, I was done. Like I wasn't drunk by any means. I've never been drunk, but I
Three's
was
good.
losing.
Three
Yeah,
is
I was.
good.
By the end, I was losing. I could tell my palate was tiring a little bit. And so when you're just the 99% of whiskey drinkers out there tasting things, you're probably going to be burnt by the last three, even if they're all 80 proof whiskeys. That you're going to be tired by the third one.
I know. And look, I'm not saying that they're not fixable or can have value. I just would like to know a little bit more, and I would be a little, if I was running one, I'd be maybe a little stricter with how I design the tastings. And I would put a little more maybe scientific thought behind some of them.
So diving a little more into notes and reviews and tastings, I loved reading in your book about your conversations and experiences with Dr. Rachel Barrie, who is now she was with Morrison Bowmore at the time of writing the book. Now she's with the group with Billy Walker. Or no, sorry, he sold them. So Glendronach and that group, formerly with Billy Walker. But also the readings and teachings of Dr. Rachel Hertz about these sensory impacts
Oh,
and
yeah.
organoleptics.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll admit, there's a lot more than I want to research about what she's written and what she's done, because I do find it fascinating, and it's good to know for reviewers, like how it affects your nose and your palate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in one of the descriptions that you gave of a particular whiskey, I don't believe it was specified. It was talking about scent memories
Mm-hmm.
and how you couldn't quite figure out a note at first, but the scent memory brought up this dish of curried chicken over rice.
Yeah, I know exactly what
And
you're talking about. Yeah.
yeah, and you're going through that recipe, like what's in that recipe that it's bringing this up, and finally you get to it, it's coconut.
Yeah, it was a very strange experience to be in a room with all of the context surrounding a coconut gone. And I'm in a lab, red lit lab, and I'm being handed a little vial with a cotton soaked aromatic of coconut. And you're smelling it and you're thinking, I know what this is. Like, why is this taking me a minute to get the word attached to it? And the first thing, after all those years was this dish my mom made. And it was some curry she'd stick coconut in. And I just kept thinking of that dish, like, which I thought was really interesting. It had been years since I had it. It just was the first thing that happened, and I had to go through all the ingredients until I landed on coconut. And I was like, oh, of course. And then once you smell it and you put the word to it, you're like, oh, that's what that is. Yeah, it's really fascinating how that works.
It's one of my
I
favorite
just
things
saw
when the
someone on TV, someone had blindfolded someone and put an orange under her nose, and she was like, it's citrus, but it took her a minute to figure out which of the citrus is it. You don't realize how much sight and context also help your brain come to whatever conclusion that is. And what's actually happening is it takes a minute for your brain to attach the word. So we call that language olfaction interference. So it takes a minute for, I think, things to click together so that you can actually say, oh, yes, that's what it is.
I do love the times when I'll be tasting something, I'll just look over to my wife and be like, I have I know this. I know what this smells like. What is the word for it? And she's not a whiskey drinker at all. I mean, yeah, she's not a whiskey drinker, so these aren't familiar scents to her. necessarily, but she's like, I don't know. And then she'll hand the glass back to me. And just in that couple of seconds, without it impacting my olfactory senses, boom, it's there.
Yeah,
And
I like that. It's fun.
it's fun.
I don't do it
I,
enough anymore with different whiskeys. I'm so preoccupied with creating product that I should go back
I
and
mean,
look at some of these old other things that I have.
look, those of us who drink Milo and Green and know about it are very grateful that you're focused on that because we,
Thank you.
we love the product coming out. Uh,
And speaking of Rachel Barrie, I mean, she's a huge
yeah.
inspiration. And a lot of the Scottish distiller blenders and Japanese are really an inspiration for me because I felt like, or we all do at Mile Green, working with refinement rather than just these big, over oaked, high tannic, high proof whiskeys. Let's pull back a little bit and have something a little more refined and subtle and look for some of the florals and the fruits and the esters and the different kinds of qualities that I think you can really get from a lot of beautiful Highland, Speyside, Scottish distilleries, some Japanese whiskeys. I love that about them. And how do we tease those out of a product using, American whiskey techniques? And that's really something I'm just absolutely fascinated with. And it's like, how do I have a bourbon but tease some of these beautiful subtler flavors? And you do have to do things that are so-called against the quote unquote rules. Like you might blend in some younger whiskey, which was always seen as taboo for a long time. And we do it because if I blend it well, we're going to get some of those beautiful mash and fermentation flavors and maybe some other elements that if I just kept it in wood for too long, it just disappears. So I really love blending some young whiskeys in with old so that I have that balance.
And
It's
when
like
you're
making a
talking,
cocktail.
right, when you're talking a long time in Scotland, maybe it's 12, 15, 18 years. Texas, it can be a couple of months, depending on the season.
Sometimes, like in our
Yeah.
finishing, yes, when we
Yeah.
finish in our port barrel, it can be very port cask, excuse me. It can be very quick. So, Scotland, yeah, 12, 13, 14-year-old whiskeys is young in Scotland. But for the same reason, I loved the Scottish young whiskeys. I loved Glenfiddich 12. I still do. I love Glenmorangie, excuse me, young Glenmorangies. I mean, they're beautiful because you get a lot of those light, fruity, estery elements before the wood really kicks in. I've tasted a lot of wood flavors. That's just a very popular style. So how do we give the customer something that is a little pulled back, a little more subtle, and still has that beautiful bourbon flavor? That's really what I'm after.
And it's something that in Texas in particular, I think goes against the uh, stereotype of Texas being these whiskeys being super brash and sometimes almost deliberately over oaked and um, motor oil dark and all these things. That
Feel like there's a movement like nationally it felt started to feel like that to me. I think the Texan whiskeys, look, our Texan grain to glass distillate out of our 1,000-gallon pot still is really, I love it, but it's richer. It's definitely spicier and thicker and richer. I wouldn't call it motor oil, but you do taste some of that down here. Less so, I think, is the Texas distilleries are killing it right now. All my brothers and sisters down here are really crushing it. I mean, they're really giving everybody else a run for their money. It took a while, but they have rounded the corner. And let me tell you, I'm getting a run for my money out here with them because they're creating such really beautiful liquid now. They get it. They understand how to work with the climate.
you're right. It took a few years. I fully agree with you. They've turned a corner in a big way
Yeah,
with
it's the next
a lot of
frontier,
great
man.
Texas whiskey coming out. Yeah. So we are short on time. So
Exciting.
I want to ask you one more question for today. Hopefully we'll have you back, which is a really important one. And it harkens back to your entire journey. You were asked, I'm sure, many, many more times than just once, how did someone like you, in brackets, a chick, get into whiskey? Uh, Rather than ask you, like, do you still get that question? Because I'm sure you do. um, Instead, I'll ask, uh, do you feel that the intention behind the question is the same today as it would have been when you were at Flatiron, at William Grant and Sons.
Not at all. I think that is great. I still do get the question. It's the question sentiment behind it. And that's a great question, has definitely changed. So originally it was like that. How did you quote unquote a chicken, and like unbelievable, like how, and I didn't even realize there was such a thing. But now it's, how did you get into this? Because damn, I want to get into that too. And I want that job. Like, that's awesome. And, it's a totally like, yeah, I believe it because, we're here now. And I think people know that. I think now it's just like, that's cool. How did that happen? Yeah. It changed to that from the cool, how did that happen is the change. Before it was like disbelief and like, I gotta know, how did that happen? The tone was different for sure.
Like, used to be like a woman pouring the whiskey. Like, you're not just here to pour the whiskey for us. And I'm glad to hear that the intention seems to have changed. The question
like
can be okay.
Like, I could maybe do this too. Yeah.
Right. And then, Rachel Barrie being in an inspiration to you, you can now be an inspiration to a whole new generation for women and men everyone who wants to get into whiskey and
I hope so.
needs a journey. So with that, I do have to let you go. But Heather, thank you so much for connecting, coming on. It was great to talk to you.
Thanks, David.
And hang on with me for just 1 second. And I will see you all next week. Hey folks, thanks for listening to another episode of the Whiskey Ring podcast. If you like what you hear, please go ahead and click that subscribe, follow, or like button. Leave a rating and review on your podcast app of choice, and let me know what you want to hear. You can reach out to me through the podcast apps or email me at david@whiskeymyweddingring.com with any suggestions or ideas for new show guests. You can also support the podcast at patreon.com/whiskeymyweddingring. That's whiskey with an E, for as little as $1 a month. $5 a month gets you access to bonus content, including our soon-to-resume Under the Influencer series, and $25 a month means you join the Barrel Share Club. Each month, Barrel Share Club members get to try products sent to me for review, bottles from my own collection, and sometimes bottles that I just pick up because they're fun or interesting. Right now, only 5 spots remain in the Barrel Share Club, so grab your place today. Finally, please follow on Instagram. You can follow me at Whiskey My Wedding Ring or at Whiskey Ring Podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Whiskey Ring. You can follow on Facebook at Whiskey My Wedding Ring or join the Facebook group, the Whiskey Ringers group. And I hope to see you there. Cheers, thank you for the support, and see you next time.